Last summer I pulled 63 pounds of tomatoes off 4 plants in my little Sacramento backyard. 4 plants. And the only thing I did differently was feed them a homemade mix I stir together in a 5-gallon bucket for about $2. How many times have you spent 20, 30, 40 bucks on bottled tomato fertilizer and still ended up with sad yellow-leafed plants by July? I did that for almost 15 years before Gloria, my old neighbor in San Francisco, walked me through what she actually feeds her balcony tomatoes. I'm going to show you the exact recipe, the exact ratios, and how often to use it. And stick around to the end, because there's one kitchen scrap I add to the bucket that Gloria swears is the reason her tomatoes never crack. Let me anchor that 63-pound number for you, because I know it sounds like the kind of thing somebody says on the internet to get you to click. 4 Cherokee purple plants, the 4x8 raised bed in my backyard, the one closer to the patio. I weighed every harvest on a little digital kitchen scale I keep on the counter, dumped the running total into a note on my phone, and at the end of September, the total was 63 pounds and a few ounces. The year before, same bed, same spot, same amount of sun, I used a bottle of name-brand tomato fertilizer from the hardware store and pulled about 22 pounds off 4 plants. Same effort, triple the harvest. The only thing that changed was what I was feeding them. Here's the thing. I did this the wrong way for almost 15 years. Most folks reach for bottled tomato fertilizer, and if you actually flip the bottle over and read the numbers, it's usually heavy on phosphorus and light on potassium and calcium. That's fine for getting a plant to flower. It is not fine for what a tomato actually craves once the fruit starts swelling. Your plant flowers, sets a handful of fruit, and then runs out of fuel right around the 4th of July. That's why your leaves yellow. That's why your fruit stays small. The plant is hungry for stuff the bottle isn't giving it. I'm going to walk you through this in 5 steps. 5 steps to build the mix, steep it, and feed your plants correctly. Then at the end, I'll share the one kitchen scrap Gloria adds that keeps her tomatoes from cracking. Step 1. Gather your ingredients, and let's actually price this out, because the $2 number I gave you at the start is a real number, not a marketing number. You need 5 things: 2 cups of worm castings or finished compost, 2 tablespoons of unsulfured blackstrap molasses, 1 tablespoon of plain Epsom salt, half a cup of crushed eggshells, and a 5-gallon bucket of water. That's it. 5 things. Now let's add it up. The worm castings come out of the subpod bin I have buried in the corner of my raised bed. I drop my kitchen scraps in, the worms do their job, and every few weeks I pull out a couple cups of black, crumbly castings that look like coffee grounds and smell like the forest floor after a rain. Free. The eggshells come out of my breakfast pan. I rinse them, let them dry on the windowsill, and crush them in a mason jar with the bottom of a wooden spoon. Free. The water, if you can catch rainwater off a roof or a shed, also free. I keep a 30-gallon barrel under my back gutter, and it fills up after one Sacramento winter storm. That leaves the molasses and the Epsom salt. A bottle of unsulfured blackstrap molasses from the grocery store runs me about $9 and lasts the whole season. That works out to roughly $1.20 per batch. A box of Epsom salt at the drugstore is around $6 and lasts me 2 years. That's about 40 cents per batch. Add it up. $1.60 to $2 depending on where you shop. For a 5-gallon bucket of mix that feeds 4 tomato plants for 2 weeks. Compare that to the $32 bottle of tomato fertilizer I used to buy that lasted me about 6 weeks and didn't even work. The math is not subtle. A quick word on the worm castings, because that's the one piece most folks don't have lying around. If you don't have a worm bin yet, you can buy a bag of castings at any garden center for about $15, and it'll last you most of a season. Or you can substitute well-finished compost from a municipal compost program. A lot of cities give it away free if you bring your own bucket. Just make sure it's actually finished. If it still smells like garbage, it isn't ready, and you'll cook your tomato roots. Gloria has been making compost in a tiny worm bin under her kitchen sink for 2 decades, and that's the whole engine behind her balcony tomatoes. The castings are the heart of this mix. Step 2. Mix everything into the bucket in the right order because the order actually matters. I learned this the hard way the first time I tried Gloria's recipe in 2018. I dumped everything in at once, stirred it like a chowder, and ended up with a clump of eggshell at the bottom and molasses goo stuck to the sides of the bucket. The microbes never got fed and the plants barely responded. Order matters. Start with the water. Fill your 5-gallon bucket about 4/5 of the way, leaving room at the top so you don't slosh when you stir. If you're using rainwater, you're good to go. If you're using tap water, this is important. Fill the bucket and let it sit out uncovered for at least 24 hours before you do anything else with it. Most city tap water has chlorine in it, and chlorine kills the microbes you're about to feed. Letting it sit lets the chlorine off-gas into the air. 24 hours is the minimum. 48 is better. I keep a second bucket going at all times for this reason, so I always have off-gassed water ready when I need it. Next, add the molasses, 2 tablespoons right into the water. I stir with a paint stick, one of those free ones you get at the hardware store, for about 30 seconds, until I can't see any dark streaks at the bottom. Molasses is sticky stuff, and it'll glue itself to the bottom of the bucket if you don't dissolve it fully. Here's why the molasses matters. The sugars in blackstrap are food for soil microbes. Bacteria, fungi, the whole invisible workforce that takes raw nutrients and converts them into forms a tomato root can actually pull up. Without microbes, even the best fertilizer in the world just sits there in the soil and does nothing. The molasses wakes them up and gets them multiplying. Then add the Epsom salt, 1 tablespoon. Stir it in until it dissolves, which takes another 30 seconds or so. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate. Plain old magnesium and sulfur, no fancy chemistry. Magnesium is the center of every chlorophyll molecule in your plant. No magnesium, no green leaves. No green leaves, no photosynthesis. No photosynthesis, no tomatoes. If you've ever seen yellowing between the veins on your tomato leaves while the veins themselves stay dark green, that's classic magnesium deficiency. And a tablespoon of Epsom salt every 2 weeks fixes it cold. Now add your 2 cups of worm castings. I dump them in and stir slowly for about a minute. The water will turn the color of weak tea. That's exactly what you want. The castings are doing 2 jobs at once. They're providing a balanced mix of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in slow-release form, and they're carrying live microbial communities, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, all the little workers, into the bucket where the molasses is going to feed them. By the time you pour this onto your tomato plant, you're not just delivering nutrients. You're delivering a whole ecosystem. Last, the eggshells. Half a cup, crushed as fine as you can get them. I add them last and don't stir hard, because they tend to clump if you fight them. Just sprinkle them across the surface and let them settle. Eggshells are about 95% calcium carbonate, and calcium is the nutrient that prevents blossom end rot, that ugly black sunken spot on the bottom of an otherwise perfect tomato. Now, I want to be honest about this one. Eggshells release their calcium slowly, over weeks, not hours. You're not solving a calcium problem with one batch. You're building up calcium in your soil over a whole season of feeding. But the eggshells also do something else interesting in the bucket. They buffer the pH, keeping the mix from going too acidic during the steep, which keeps your microbes happy. Once all 5 ingredients are in the bucket, give it one more slow stir with the paint stick. Bottom to top, twice around. You should have a dark tea-colored liquid with a little sediment of eggshell at the bottom and a faint sweet smell from the molasses. That's the mix. That's your $2 bucket of tomato food. Now we let it work. Step 3. Steep the bucket for 48 hours and stir it twice a day. Once in the morning when I'm out feeding pepper and checking the beds, and once in the evening before the sun goes down. I use the same paint stick from the mixing step. Bottom to top, slow stirs about 30 seconds each time. What you're doing here is keeping oxygen moving through the liquid so the good aerobic microbes, the ones the molasses is feeding, stay alive and multiply. If you let it sit perfectly still for 2 days straight in a closed bucket, the oxygen gets used up, and a different set of bacteria takes over. Anaerobic bacteria, and those guys do not smell good. Here's the thing, keep that bucket in the shade. Not on a sunny patio, not on the south side of the house where it's hitting 95 degrees by noon. Sacramento summers will cook a bucket of fertilizer tea into something nasty in about 6 hours if you let the sun get on it. I keep mine on the north side of my back patio, under the eave, with a piece of window screen laid loose over the top to keep mosquitoes from finding it. Not a sealed lid. The mix needs to breathe. After 48 hours, give it a sniff. A good batch smells faintly sweet, a little earthy like dark beer or fresh soil after a rain. That means the microbes are happy and the nutrients are dissolved. A bad batch smells sour, sulfury like rotten eggs or a swamp. If you get the bad version, here's Gloria's rule, and it's the same rule I use in the kitchen and the garden. If it smells bad, it is bad. Dump it on the compost pile, rinse the bucket, start over. That's a $2 lesson, not a tragedy. I'd rather lose a batch than burn the roots of 4 tomato plants I've been babying since February. Now, if what I'm showing you today is making sense, and you're starting to realize that those worm castings, the backbone of this whole bucket, are something most folks don't have lying around the house, I want to point you to where that piece of the system gets solved. The full setup lives in Chapter 6 of my book, The 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol. Chapter 6 is called Composting in Small Spaces, and it walks you through the small worm bin I keep buried in my raised bed, with 2 diagrams showing exactly how the bin is layered and how you harvest the castings without disturbing the worms. $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. If you're watching this on your TV, go ahead and grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time pulling that up. I'll wait right here. If you're on your phone or laptop, the link is right there in the description. All right, back to the bucket. Step 4. Application. This is where a lot of folks mess up, including me, for a very long time, so listen close. You're going to pour 2 cups of this mix around the base of each plant. Not on the plant. Around the base, in a ring about 6 inches out from the main stem. I use a measuring cup from my kitchen, the same red plastic 2-cup measure I use for pancake batter, and I dip it right into the bucket and pour slow. 1 cup on one side of the stem, 1 cup on the other. The liquid should soak in within a minute or 2. If it's puddling and running off, your soil is too compacted and you need to scratch the surface up first with a hand fork. Do not get this stuff on the leaves. I'm going to say it again because I learned this one the painful way. In 2020, I was in a hurry one Saturday morning, and I had the bright idea to thin the mix down with extra water and just splash it across the whole plant, feed the leaves, save time, kill 2 birds. By Monday afternoon, every leaf I'd hit had yellow scorch marks on it, and within a week 3 of my plants had a fungal spotting that took me the rest of the summer to deal with. The molasses sugar sits on the leaf surface and feeds the wrong kinds of fungi. The Epsom salt burns the leaf tissue in direct sun. Pour at the base, always. Do this every 14 days. Mark it on a calendar if you're the kind of person who forgets. I do it every other Saturday morning, same time as my coffee. Start the day the very first yellow flower opens on any of your plants, not when you see buds. Not when the plant looks ready. When you walk out one morning and see one bright yellow blossom open, that's day 1 of your feeding schedule. And stop 3 weeks before your first expected frost. Here in Sacramento, my first frost lands somewhere between December 5th and 15th, so my last feed of the season is usually around November 14th. Stopping early gives the plant time to finish the fruit it's already set without pushing new growth that won't ripen. For 4 plants in a 4x8 bed, 1 batch of bucket mix is exactly 1 feeding. 10 cups of liquid, 2 cups per plant, plus a little extra to rinse the bucket clean over the bed. No waste. That's the math. Step 5. Adjust through the season. The mix isn't a set-it-and-forget-it recipe. The plant tells you what it needs if you watch it. From the day the first flower opens through about mid-June here in Sacramento, the basic recipe is exactly right. 2 tablespoons of molasses, 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt, 2 cups of castings, ½ a cup of eggshells. That's your spring and early summer feed. When July hits and the plants go into heavy fruiting mode, and you'll know because suddenly there are 30 green tomatoes hanging on every plant, and the whole thing is leaning sideways under the weight, bump the molasses to 3 tablespoons per batch. The extra sugar feeds an explosion of microbial activity right when the plant is pulling the most nutrients out of the soil. I started doing this in 2022 after watching Gloria pour an extra glug of molasses into her balcony jug in late July, and saying, in that quiet teacher way she has, that the plants are working harder so the soil has to work harder too. In September and into October, when nights start cooling off, and the plant is finishing its last round of fruit, instead of pushing new growth, back the feeding off to every 21 days instead of every 14. The plant isn't drinking as much. Feeding the same amount just builds up salts in the soil and stresses the roots. And watch the leaves. If you start seeing purple tinges on the undersides of leaves, especially on the lower part of the plant, that's phosphorus stress. And it usually means the nitrogen in the castings is running ahead of the phosphorus uptake. Cut the worm castings back to 1½ cups per batch for the next 2 feedings, and the purple usually clears up in a couple of weeks. If you see the opposite, pale yellow new growth at the top of the plant, bump the castings back up. The plant tells you. You just have to look. That's the full 5-step system. Mix, steep, apply, repeat, adjust. $2 a batch, 15 minutes of work every other Saturday, and the kind of yield that makes your neighbors stop you at the mailbox to ask what you're doing differently. Now, before we go any further, I want to walk through the 3 mistakes I see folks make the most with this mix. Because the recipe is simple, but there are 3 places where well-meaning people knock the whole thing off the rails, and I'd rather you skip those problems than learn them the hard way like I did. Mistake number 1, pouring the mix on the leaves. I already told you my 2020 story, But I want to say it again because every season I get comments from folks who tried this mix and ended up with yellow scorch marks across their plants. The molasses and Epsom salt combination is fantastic for soil microbes and for root uptake. It is terrible for leaf surfaces. Direct sun on a wet leaf coated in sugar and salt will burn yellow spots within 24 hours, and those burn spots become open doors for fungal disease. The fix is simple. Pour only at the base in a ring 6 inches out from the stem. If you splash a leaf by accident, hose it off gently with plain water right away. Mistake number 2. Using fresh hot tap water straight from the spigot. Sacramento tap water, like most municipal water in the USA, has chlorine in it to kill bacteria. That's good for drinking. It is a disaster for this mix. The whole point of the molasses is to feed the microbes that turn the worm castings into plant-available nutrition. If you pour chlorinated water into the bucket, you kill the microbes before they ever wake up. I did this for an entire season in 2019 and could not figure out why the mix wasn't doing much. Gloria pointed it out in about 10 seconds when I described my routine. The fix: use rainwater if you have it, or fill the bucket with tap water and let it sit uncovered for 24 hours before you add anything else. The chlorine off-gases on its own. Mistake number 3. Starting too early in the season. I see folks get excited in April, watch their tomato plants put out the first true leaves, and start feeding the bucket mix right then. The problem is, before flowering, what tomatoes need most is a slow, steady base of nitrogen for foliage development. The bucket mix pushes a lot of microbial activity and a lot of root uptake all at once, and if you hit a young plant with it before the first flower, you get a 6-foot leafy green bush with about a dozen sad tomatoes hanging on it in August. Wait for that first yellow flower. The plant tells you when it's ready. Then start the 14-day cycle and don't look back. All right, I told you at the start there's one kitchen scrap I add to the bucket that Gloria swears is the reason her tomatoes never crack. Here it is. 3 banana peels frozen for at least 24 hours, then thawed and chopped, dropped into the bucket at the start of the 48-hour steep. Not at application, at the start. That timing matters. Here's why the freezing step is the whole trick. A fresh banana peel takes 3 or 4 weeks to break down enough for the potassium to actually leach into water. We don't have 3 weeks, we have 48 hours. When you freeze the peel, the water inside the cells expands and ruptures the cell walls, so once it thaws, the potassium pours out into the bucket within those 2 days, instead of locking inside the peel. Same scrap, completely different chemistry just because you stuck it in the freezer overnight. And here's why potassium is the anti-cracking ingredient. When a tomato fruit is sitting on a plant that's been dry for a few days, and then a hard rain hits, or you finally remember to water heavy, the fruit pulls that water in fast. Too fast for the skin to stretch. The skin splits, and you get those concentric rings cracked across the top of every tomato. Potassium keeps the cell walls of the skin elastic and slows down how quickly the fruit takes up that surge. The water still goes in, but the skin moves with it instead of bursting. Gloria has been doing this for 20 years on a balcony in San Francisco. She travels to see her granddaughter May for long weekends. Watering is irregular, the fog comes in heavy some weeks and not at all the next, and her tomatoes never split. Pre-frozen peels. That's the whole secret. Gloria's rule, the way she said it to me, was simple. Feed the skin, not just the fruit. Before I let you go, I want to tell you where the rest of this lives. Everything I just walked you through. The cheap containers, the free soil, the 4-plant raised bed on a tiny city lot. That whole playbook is Chapter 4 of my ebook, The 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol. It's called Container Gardening on Zero Budget, and it's got diagrams showing exactly how I size the containers for fruiting crops, how I layer the soil, and how I turn a $3 bag of grocery store potatoes into 100 pounds of food. The whole book is $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. It's the guide I wish I'd had 10 years ago when I was killing tomato plants in my Portland apartment with no yard and no clue. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. If you're on your phone already, the link is right there in the description. Take your time. I'll wait right here. So that's how I get 63 pounds of tomatoes off 4 plants for about $2 a batch and 3 frozen banana peels. If you've been staring at a wilted tomato plant in July wondering what you did wrong, try 1 batch this week. Just 1 bucket, 1 feeding, and watch what the plant does over the next 2 weeks. If you want to see how I built the worm bin that produces the castings for this whole recipe, I've got a video on that next. It's the foundation under everything I just showed you. Drop a comment and let me know how your bucket turns out. I read every one of them. Until next time, keep growing your own food, my friend.